Good evening. Once upon a time, in Rome, there was a florist named Antonio Spiriticchio. He was a street florist. He was someone who had a fixed spot where he parked his van, then opened the shutter and sold his flowers from the van. One day in March 1978, as he went out to the street in the morning to go to work, the florist found that someone had slashed a tire. He must have said a few swear words. He changed the tire and was on time for work at 9 in the morning. A couple of days later, when going down in the morning to go to work, the florist found that the van had all 4 tires slashed. He must have cursed a lot that morning. He sat there, tried to change the tires, and eventually succeeded, but it was no use. That morning, at work, he was late. It was the morning of March 16th, 1978, and the place where the florist usually worked from his parked van was Stresa Street, at the corner of Mario Fani Street. I don't know if the date and the name would remind you of something if it weren't for the fact that you know what the topic of our meeting is tonight. That was the day the Red Brigades had planned to kidnap Aldo Moro, and the corner of Stresa Street and Mario Fani Street is the exact point where they had decided to block Moro's cars and abduct him. During the trial of the Red Brigades, it emerged that they, studying the scene of the ambush, had realized that the florist was exactly at the point where Moro's car would have stopped, and especially where the escort vehicle behind it would have been. The florist would have found himself in the line of fire of the shooting group that was supposed to eliminate the escort. And the brigadists did not want to make unnecessary victims. Therefore, they had decided that the florist should not be there that morning. They had done a dress rehearsal a few days earlier by slashing one of his tires. Still, he was there at 9 o'clock. So on the day of the ambush, they decided to go all out. They slashed all 4 of his tires. Mario Moretti will then tell, or rather he will say, "Do you understand what situation we were in? If by chance that morning something went wrong and we had to postpone to another day, on that other day we would again have to slash all 4 of his tires." And Moretti says, "How many times could we do it? Besides, Antonio Spiriticchio would have had a nervous breakdown," says Moretti. "And anyway, sooner or later someone would have started to suspect something." Here, the story we will tell tonight is also made up of these details. An historian who has long studied the Moro case wrote that studying this page of Italian history means immersing oneself in a horrific dimension made almost exclusively of murdered individuals and lies. It is true, however, that reconstructing this story, how the Red Brigades planned and executed the kidnapping of Moro, because that is the theme of tonight, also means uncovering many unexpected things, many unforeseen details about what it meant to be a clandestine network of terrorists and to prepare an attack in Italy during the 1970s. It is appropriate to make a preamble even today, so let's do it. I will try to recount the established facts. The established and undisputed facts allow for the reconstruction of almost the entire dynamics of Aldo Moro's kidnapping. Then beyond this, there are insinuations, there are theorems, there are far-fetched theories, and there are contradictory testimonies on which someone has built alternative hypotheses. I personally believe very little in almost all the conspiracy theories that have been published regarding the actions of the Red Brigades during those days. What I will tell you today is what emerges from the testimonies, the trials, the records, and the books that the protagonists have written. Many small areas of shadow remain, and many contradictory details persist. I do not believe that, in essence, there are many things that truly matter to us that remain unknown. There are people in Italy who believe that there are still great secrets to be uncovered. I don't believe that much. Anyway, this is the version that can be put together by lining up the things we are fairly certain about. And let's start with the Red Brigades. What were the Red Brigades? Mario Moretti, whom I will quote very often. I've been telling myself for days, you have to be careful not to call him Nanni Moretti. I will surely slip up. Mario Moretti, who is one of the main figures, is the mastermind behind the Aldo Moro crime, and has shared a lot. Of course, he told the story the way he wanted. We should not think that his testimony is candid, just as the testimonies of the ministers of the Interior or the generals of the Carabinieri are not candid. But still, Mario Moretti has said a lot, and according to him, the Red Brigades were a very small vanguard. There were few of them, very few. But they had widespread support in the factories, Moretti is sure. There were few of them because they had decided that the irregular militants, as they called them, which is a military term, is interesting this. The Red Brigades use military terminology. They see themselves as an army. Irregulars were decided to live in total secrecy, with false names and false documents. Obviously, this is a complex matter. Therefore, the regulars are very few, at most a few dozen in each of the major cities, where the Red Brigades are present. But they have a vast network of supporters. There are a lot of comrades who live their normal lives in the sunlight, but secretly look favorably upon the Red Brigades and help out whenever they can. The Red Brigades are organized as we remember, from those times, in columns. It is another military term. In every city, the organization of the Red Brigades is called the Roman column, the Genoese column. Each column is completely autonomous. It answers to a central executive, but knows nothing about the other columns. And this is a fundamental principle for surviving in hiding. The less you know, the less you will tell when you are arrested. It's called compartmentalization. Columns are born in a city when there is certainty that there is favorable ground in that city. In fact, they tell them when they used to call us from that city. When there is a network of people who look at us with sympathy, so dense that they manage to find us, they manage to contact us, they ask us to go there, then we would send comrades into the city and check if it was possible to set up a new column. The Roman column, which is the one that manages the Moro crime, meaning the most high-profile action of the Red Brigades, is not one of the strongest. The strength of the Red Brigades lay in the large industrial cities, in Milan, in Turin, in Genoa. Mario Moretti claims that even in Rome they actually had a certain strength in the end. There was also some factory in Rome. Moretti says there was a factory where we had a nucleus, a brigade as they call it, a factory in Pomezia. Other groups were in places, so to speak, that are more what we might expect in a large city like Rome, at the SIP, in hospitals, and then groups in working-class neighborhoods, in the suburbs, in Tiburtino, in Centoselle, in Primavalle. Moretti recounts that the Red Brigades in Rome were actually strong. Other brigadists have told a slightly different story. In particular, there is a very important witness, Valerio Morucci. One must be careful not to confuse him with Moretti. Both Morucci will be on Mario Fani Street at the time of the ambush on Aldo Moro. But then their paths diverged. Morucci has distanced himself and is very critical of that period, while Moretti is much less so. And so Morucci says, Moretti is exaggerating. It's not true that the Red Brigades were strong in Rome. They were just a handful. And Valerio Morucci says, and I know it because when my girlfriend and I asked to join the Red Brigades, my girlfriend is Adriana Ferranda. Morucci and Ferranda had been members of another organization, the NAP, the Armed Proletarian Nuclei. Then in the summer of 76, they asked to join the Red Brigades, and Marucci says, "They took us in right away. Not only did they take us in right away, they immediately made us full-time, regular, clandestine militants." And Marucci says, I quote, "If they let us in right away as regulars, as arrogant as they were, it meant they weren't doing so well." Marucci is someone who entered the scene after having had other experiences and then dissociated himself. In his recollection, he tends to emphasize that there are those of us who arrived later, and then there were the true brigadists who were arrogant. This is important because it highlights one of the many things that need to be remembered. The Red Brigades are not monolithic. There are the militants from the early days, the pure and hardliners, and then there are those who came later, those who had other experiences and over time developed doubts. They are anything but monolithic. However, at the time of Aldo Moro's kidnapping, those doubts had not yet emerged. At a certain point, the Red Brigades decide that they need to demonstrate their strength. They must show their power by kidnapping and putting one of the leaders of the Christian democracy on trial. It is a decision that matured between 1976 and 1977. On this, the testimonies are somewhat contradictory, and they must have talked about it at length. What is certain is that, at that moment in Turin, the trial of the so-called historical core of the Red Brigades is underway, including Renato Curcio and others, such as Franceschini. The state is prosecuting the Red Brigades. Therefore, the Red Brigades decide to prosecute the state. According to their analysis, the state means the Christian democracy, DC. The DC fully owns and manages the state. It is an analysis that may not be entirely wrong, to be honest. Let's say it outright. Of course, it is too rigid. They have this idea. It is the DC that must target the state, but the DC means many things. There is Andreotti, there is Fanfani, there is Moro. A decision must be made. And so Valerio Marucci and Adriana Faranda are tasked with conducting some investigations to determine which of the DC leaders is the most vulnerable. And they start to go around Rome to check. Andreotti lives in the center on Corso Vittorio. Finding him is very easy. There is even a trattoria where his escort stops for lunch every day. And for several days, Marucci and Faranda also go to lunch at the same trattoria, to the point that they almost become friends with Andreotti's escort. When they are there for lunch, they nod to each other as they enter. One time, Mario Moretti also comes to lunch with them, and he puts his hands in his hair when he realizes that they are greeting the escort of Andreotti. But Andreotti, even though he is easy to find and difficult to take away, lives in the center of Rome. The streets are narrow. Blocking the center is very easy. The police checks. We are in 1978. Do you remember how many there were? Even before the kidnapping of Moro, police checks were very frequent. In short, Andreotti is not suitable. There's Fanfani. Let's go see. They have an address for Fanfani in Trionfal. Marucci and La Faranda go to check that address, ring the doorbell, but Fanfani does not live here. Since they couldn't find him, they didn't know how to proceed, and as a result, even Fanfani gave up on kidnapping him. This is another thing worth remembering. The Red Brigades are not supermen. They are a couple of fiancés in this case, Marucci, 29 years old, and Faranda, 27, who go to check on an intercom if Fanfani is listed. Fanfani is not listed, and the Red Brigades are unable to proceed. Moro would remain. And in a meeting, one of the brigadists says, this is Franco Bonisoli, known as the Rossino, who will be in the firing group for the attack on Moro, and who is one of the leaders of the EBR. He is in the executive. Franco Bonisoli says, some time ago, one morning, I was passing by the church of Santa Chiara in Camilluccia, and I saw 2 blue cars parked. A good brigadist then stops to check what is happening. I was stopped, and do you know what I saw? I saw that Moro was going there to pray in church. before going to the office at 9 in the morning. It was his blue cars with the escort. And he tells good souls that the next morning he returned to see they were there again at the same time. He always takes the same route and stops to pray at the church of Santa Chiara. Moro lives outside the historic center, which is an important detail. He lives in Monte Mario, where the traffic problem is different, and he stops at Camillucci at Santa Chiara to pray. Let me give you an example. Now regarding this detail of how the Brigadists knew that Moro stopped every morning at the church of Santa Chiara, I will provide an example of the small, frustrating details for which there are contradictory versions, and on which we cannot be 100% sure. They all tell the same story. Yes, Bonisoli saw it, but Valerio Marucci tells a different story. Valerio Marucci says that the story about Moro going to pray every morning at Santa Chiara had already come up in a meeting 3 years earlier. It was the first time that those from the north, as Valerio Marucci says, had come to Rome to establish the Roman column. He wasn't there yet in that meeting. He arrived later. Who knows if he's telling the truth? The Brigadists, who came from Milan, are very unpleasant to Marucci. They say that in Rome, they thought more or less like the League supporters. And anyway, those from the north who came to Rome, according to Marucci, had brought with them as a relic a newspaper clipping that reported how the Honorable Moro would stop every morning on his way to work to attend Mass at the Church of Santa Chiara. At this point, it is very difficult to know if this story is true. Marucci is someone who writes well. He has written many books and enjoys romanticizing. But in the end, it doesn't matter to us. It was just to give you an idea of the 1,000 little things on which the historian struggles to determine what the truth is. But in any case, the substance is clear. Moro is the easiest target. In the autumn of 77, at the national level, the Red Brigades decide to kidnap Moro. The executive committee of the Red Brigades assigns the Roman column to study the action. How are the Red Brigades organized at the top? The executive committee is in charge. There are 4 members: Moretti, Azzolini, Micheletto, and Bonisoli. Above them is the strategic direction of the EBR. But the strategic direction is a cumbersome body that includes representatives from all the columns, 15 people who are present. Therefore, the strategic direction cannot meet at all times. People come from all over Italy. It is a guiding body. The strategic direction discusses and prepares the famous documents that set the guidelines. In February 1978, a month before the kidnapping of Aldo Moro, the strategic leadership of the Red Brigades met in a villa in Velletri, provided by the Roman column, and prepared the resolution in which they declared that the Christian democracy, DC, is the #1 enemy. This strategic resolution of the Red Brigades, just to give an idea of their ability to spread their ideas, is printed in 10,000 copies that are distributed in Italian factories. After that, once the decision was made, the strategic direction steps back. Now the executive comes into play, and the link between the executive and the Roman column is Mario Moretti. What do we do concretely? We need to decide, do we want to kidnap Moro? Very well. Where? We need to follow him, study his habits, and figure out where to kidnap him. The first idea is the Church of Santa Chiara. They already have this element in hand. Therefore, Valerio Marucci and Adriana Faranda, 2 young lovers holding hands, go for a walk in the morning in front of the Church of Santa Chiara. They pass so close, and every morning the cars of Moro's escort are there. The 2 young lovers walk past the escort cars, so close that they can hear the policemen chatting. One of them says, "Look, the swallows have arrived. Spring is coming soon." Many years later, Adriana Faranda will tell Valerio Marucci that that phrase has stuck with her and still causes a lump in her throat, because they are passing by those police officers and must decide how to kidnap Moro and how many people they will need to kill. The Church of Santa Chiara seems for a moment like an ideal place because Moro enters and goes to the front pew to pray. Of the 5 bodyguards, only 2 enter and stop at the entrance of the church, while the other 3 remain outside. So, in short, if we enter with force, we can immobilize the 2 policemen who have come in. There is no need to shoot. We take Moro and bring him outside. From where? There is a side exit from the Church of Santa Chiara. Marucci goes in and out of that church as if it were his home. In the end, he studies it from every angle, convinced that it can be done. However, from that side exit of the church, one can see a newsstand on the street. So from the newsstand, the exit is visible. Every morning, the police officers on guard who stay outside, at a certain point, go to buy the newspaper at the newsstand, which wouldn't be ideal. But then another thing comes to light. The side exit leads to the courtyard of a school. It is the courtyard of a school, and at 9 in the morning, it is the time when children and mothers come in and out. When this is discussed in the executive, they say no, it can't be done. We can't kidnap Moro and take him out among the mothers and children with the risk that the escort will react and a shootout will begin. It's not even talked about. So, where are we going to pick him up? Moro teaches at the university. They are going to check the university to study his schedule and classrooms. Antonio Savasta goes there, who will later become one of the famous turncoats of the Red Brigades. He follows Moro, goes to class, takes the timings, then he comes back and says, "No guys, we can't do this." First, it is always full of students, always crowded with people. Second, and this is interesting, in that dangerous place which is the university, amidst those dangerous people who are the students, the police escort of Moro is on high alert, extremely attentive with their fingers on the trigger. So that is the last place where one could go to get him. And so there is only one solution. We need to take him on the street. We have to block the cars at a certain point and take him away. Certainly in that case, it will be necessary to kill the escort. All of this is carried out by a very small group. About 10 militants make up the Roman column of the Red Brigades. About 10 militants who live, as we said, in hiding. Living in hiding is not easy. The first difficulty is that you need fake documents. There are continuous checks in Italy during those years. You have to have your papers in order, and you need to have many of them. Mario Moretti said, "Do you know how many fake documents you need to come away clean? If you're stopped in a stolen car, you need 8. If you don't have them, it's better to take the tram. Otherwise, you won't last even 3 days." So, false documents are needed and they must be manufactured. Just like false license plates for stolen cars are made, workshops, printing houses, and skilled workers are required. And they are there. The Red Brigades are mainly composed of workers and the sympathizers. Those who live freely in the open but still lend a hand are almost all workers and technicians. Therefore, there is no difficulty. You can find those who will get things done. There is the typographer comrade, who agrees to open his own print shop in the light of day, but then when needed, he secretly prints the statements of the EBR. Then, of course, there can be accidents. At a certain point, they buy a printer, and they buy it from a second-hand dealer. This will give rise to astonishing conspiracy theories, because one day it will emerge that this printer used by the Red Brigades in the printing house had been decommissioned by the secret services. The fact that they are using a printer that comes from the secret services, of course, well, Mario Moretti will say, we would have been better off eating that printer bolt by bolt. it would have given us fewer problems. Typography is therefore fundamental. Typography will serve, for example, think about the details of a story like this. The printing press will be needed to print. During the Moro kidnapping, to forge a prescription that is necessary to buy a medication that Moro needs, and that cannot be given to him, nor can it be purchased at the pharmacy without the prescription. Now it is clear that to do all this, money is needed. All these people live in full-time secrecy without working, and therefore they receive a salary. The Red Brigades pay every regular member a salary. They call it that. They are salaried, and naturally the salary is that of a worker, not a lira more. In fact, Valerio Marucci, as you have understood, is somewhat distanced from the purists. Marucci recounts, the purists managed to not even spend their entire worker's salary that was paid to them every month. And if they had anything left over, they would bring it back. They were out of their minds, says Marucci. Where does this money come from? At first, they committed robberies, bank robberies and heists at post offices. They call them expropriations. But it is very risky and very demanding because robbery yields little. So many must be done. Moretti says that basically we were robbing a bank every month. We couldn't go on like this. We weren't doing anything else. And it wasn't enough. Many comrades were not happy. Many comrades said, "But I really don't actually want to enter into a bank and shout." Therefore, they deliberate and decide that a change of strategy is necessary. They need to kidnap prominent industrialists and demand a ransom. Many of us remember that during that time, kidnappings were quite frequent in Italy. Common criminals kidnapped for ransom, and the Red Brigades did the same. They carried out more than one, and then they executed a grand one that secured their position forever. They kidnapped Pietro Costa from the family of Genoese ship owners, Costa Cruises. You know them, right now. This kidnapping of Costa I will take a little time because it is a story that deserves to be told in an hour as well. The story of the Costa kidnapping. Pietro Costa is a young member of the family. The Red Brigades kidnap him and demand a ransom. The Costa family, Genoese ship owners, old school, begin to negotiate. They negotiated for 3 months, forcing the Red Brigades to gradually lower the ransom demand. When the amount requested by the EBR matches the insurance amount, the Costa family pays. The brigadists recounted that when they released Pietro Costa after 3 months of captivity, they returned his wallet to him. He checked to make sure everything was there, and then said, "There was a bus ticket stamped on only one side." The fact is that the brigadists are delighted. They admire them greatly. These are the true enemies worth fighting against. The brigadists adore these old hostile industrialists who know the value of money and people with whom they understand each other. After all, Moretti will say it himself, when we kidnapped an industrialist or a company executive, we understood each other immediately. We spoke the same language and talked about the same thing. We would tell him the worker's point of view, and he would respond with the owner's point of view. Meanwhile, Moretti says, when we were kidnapping or when we had to interact with a magistrate or a politician, there was no understanding at all. You know that with Moro, they didn't understand each other. One of the dramas of the Moro kidnapping, struggling to understand. And instead, they understand each other with the industrialists. This story about the Costa kidnapping, well, there's still this. It's a detail, but still, let's tell it. They pay for 2 suitcases full of money. The Red Brigades are in a garage with these 2 closed suitcases full of money and are afraid to open them because they fear there might be a trick, a bomb. They obtained gas masks and put them on, and at that point, They do not open the suitcases. They cut the lid. The suitcases are full of money. Great relief. There is the money. They take off their gas masks. And then as soon as they handle it, they realize that this money, these banknotes, 2 suitcases of banknotes, have all been coated with a strange phosphorescent powder. Even now, when the brigadists recount this story, they don't know whether to laugh or cry. They wonder what the police were thinking. Anyway, the fact is that the banknotes are all coated with phosphorescent powder. So the brigadists spend the following weeks washing each banknote one by one with a sponge and then hanging them in the bathroom with clothespins to dry. Like in a Toto movie, says Mario Moretti. The Costa kidnapping yields 1.5 billion lire, enough to sustain the Red Brigades for 4 years. All the money is taken in charge by the Executive Committee, which distributes it to the various columns according to their needs. The Executive Committee keeps the accounts, and, in theory, every militant has the right to request to see the accounts. Moretti says it never happened. No one cared about the money, and I believe we can trust him on this. One of the main uses of the money is to pay for accommodations. It is necessary to rent places to stay. You see, for those living in hiding, the weak point is the home. And among other things, the state knows this, and tries to tighten its grip specifically on housing. Just before the Moro kidnapping, a new law is passed stating that landlords who rent accommodations must report it to the police, along with the tenant's document details. Now the Red Brigades in Rome have their main office on Chiabrera Street in Ostiense, which Valerio Marucci rented under a false name, pretending to be an engineer who was setting up a business. When this law about reporting to the police comes out, Marucci becomes worried. It's not like the landlady is coming to ask me for the documents, the photocopy. How is it not? He decides to play it safe. He calls the landlady. He says, "Madam, have you seen the new law?" The lady knew nothing. Marucci explains to her that there is a new law, she should fill out some forms and take them to the police. "But look, ma'am, if you want, come here for a moment, we can talk about it." The landlady goes to Marucci's house on Chiabrera Street. Marucci tells her, "Look, ma'am, I checked the law carefully. It is not retroactive, so we are fine. However, if you want to be completely at ease, I have already taken the forms if you want to fill them out." "No," says the landlady, "but just imagine, you are such a good person." And the landlady says she doesn't know who was here before her. There were 2 Calabrian students. They even had a flag with the sickle and hammer hanging on the wall. In my opinion, they were from the Red Brigades. Now, landlords are always a problem. So when you want to be really sure about your accommodation, you have to buy it. They buy the accommodation in which to kidnap Moro. As soon as the kidnapping is decided, Mario Moretti looks for a place to buy with the money from the Costa kidnapping. There are criteria. It must be in an anonymous place, an anonymous street, any building, without a doorman, no one watching who comes and goes. And it needs to have a garage with storage units. With storage units that allow quick access to the accommodation without being seen. They find a place to stay that would be just right, in a tiny street that no one knows, in Magliana. It is not close to the area where Moro lives and where the kidnapping will likely take place in Montemario. But it is on the same side of the Tiber. And this is crucial. When you have Moro in the trunk, you cannot get stuck in a traffic jam on the bridge. The street is called Montalcini Street. The accommodation is purchased by a non-clandestine comrade, Laura Brighetti, who works as a clerk. After she buys the accommodation, they decide that to be absolutely sure, she must also have a boyfriend, Laura Brighetti. Therefore, Germano Macari, another brigadist, poses as her boyfriend, and together they start frequenting this accommodation to create an appearance of total normality. They buy the cage with the canaries, the tank with the goldfish. Laura Brighetti befriends the elderly lady from upstairs, She goes grocery shopping for her every now and then. And neither of them knows what the accommodation will be used for. It's always about compartmentalization. The less you know, the better it is. They only know that they have to wait. And then at the end of 77, Mario Moretti arrives and informs them that secret work needs to be done in the accommodation to create a hidden soundproof room, concealed behind a false wall and a bookshelf, just like in detective novels. And then the two also realize that a kidnapping is being prepared, but they have no idea that it will be Moro. Until the end, there will be only 4 brigadists who know the address on Montalcini Street. They are Laura and Germano, who live there, and Mario Moretti and Prospero Gallinari. The wall to hide the secret room is built by them, Moretti and Gallinari. They are workers and know how to do everything. They pull up the wall. Since there is no window, they install a fan for ventilation. Then there are always problems. On the first night that Moro remains a prisoner there, they notice that the fan makes a terrible noise. At night, it raises suspicions. Therefore, they make an agreement with Moro. They will keep the door open for half an hour every evening to change the air, and Moro commits to not making any noise during that half hour. Well, but this is how we clearly went on, right? The kidnapping has not yet taken place. They still have to decide exactly where to kidnap him. Therefore, they study the route that Moro takes with the 2 cars every morning. The route is always the same. He leaves home before 9. He lives on Forte Trionfale Street. I say this for the Romans. It goes along Trionfale, Fani, Stresa, and Della Camiluccia, stopping at the church of Santa Chiara. Along this entire route, there is a single stop, Via Fani, at the corner of Via Stresa. It is an uphill street, where cars naturally slow down, and at the top, there is the stop. On one side of the street, there is a bar, but fortunately, it is closed because it has gone bankrupt. On the other side, the florist works, but that morning, the florist will not be there. They calculate how many people are needed. This is another aspect on which we are not entirely sure. In fact, as a premise, you surely know that the speculations about how many and what kind of people participated in the ambush have never ceased. There were the East Germans, the KGB, the Palestinians, the Martians, all sorts of things. We don't know exactly how many people were there, but I am quite sure that there were neither East Germans, nor Israelis, nor Palestinians. There were definitely 11 brigadists. But we cannot exclude that 1 or 2 may have escaped, and that the comrades never reported them. So fundamentally, we know for sure about 11. 3 of whom are women. Mario Moretti said that in the Red Brigades, women were extremely important and absolutely equal to men, and he took issue with the male-dominated press that always referred to them as passionate women or girlfriends. I also remember seeing an interview with a brigadist, but I can't recall who it was, who mentioned that these comrades were truly tough, and since in hiding you miss the relationship with a woman, one might have even wanted to have a relationship with these comrades, but it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't really the right time to let them know you had such thoughts. 11 then. They need everyone. They need the fire group. They need the drivers of the various cars. They need lookouts, control groups. 11 men, and that is too many. The Red Brigades in Rome do not have 11 militants. Therefore, they bring down 2 from the north. 1 from Milan and 1 from Turin. They arrive by train, and will leave by train an hour after the ambush. 11. The youngest is 23 years old. The oldest is 31. Those who are supposed to shoot are 4, and they are all men, despite what Mario Moretti says. However, the ones with the submachine guns are 4 men, including Valerio Marucci and Prospero Gallinari. That morning, it was decided that they would disguise themselves as Alitalia pilots. This sparked new speculation, as people wondered why they needed to dress up as Alitalia pilots. And so someone said, they should be in uniform, because they didn't know each other. There was the super killer sent by the Mossad, let's suppose, and since they didn't know each other, they must have been in uniform. The brigadist said, can you imagine that? There is another reason why we were dressed as Alitalia pilots. Because just imagine, at that moment, in that historical context in Rome. 4 young men, standing still at the corner of a street. How long do you think it would take for a neighbor to call the police? And what if that day things don't go as planned and we have to go back there the next day? Instead, 4 Alitalia pilots see them all but don't notice them. They think they are waiting for the airport shuttle. Then there are also other details. The Alitalia pilot's raincoat hides the bulletproof vest very well. The 4 have a bulletproof vest, and in the Alitalia duffel bag, there is the submachine gun. Then, of course, there are also unforeseen problems, because that morning, just a few minutes before Moro's car arrives, the 4 Alitalia pilots are there, at the corner of the street. A lady arrives, sees them, and just needs some information about flights. So he goes there and starts asking. And the 4 have a hard time getting rid of the lady. As for the weapons, they are not a problem. Or rather, they are, but not in terms of obtaining them. Getting them is a joke. Moretti again. What do you think? Weapons circulate on the market like Coca-Cola. However, the Red Brigades have some scruples. They try not to buy from organized crime. It happens occasionally, but they would prefer to avoid it. They prefer to steal. Or they print permits and go to the armory to buy them legally. The printing house, once again, is crucial. Then there is an old partisan who still has the Steng hidden in the cellar, and who is convinced to lend it. And then there are the Palestinians. That is the only international contact that the Red Brigades have always acknowledged. We had contacts with the Palestinians of the PLO, and they gave us some weapons. However, they are often substandard weapons, old and in poor condition. According to Marucci, who you have understood is very critical, he and Moretti do not get along at all. According to Marucci, it was even a pose for certain leaders of the Red Brigades to go around with broken weapons. Moretti walked around with a badly worn and rusty gun, and according to Marucci, it was so for show, for elegance. Then they need cars. They need many cars. And all of them are stolen in the weeks prior. From people, from comrades who do not clearly know what it will be used for. They only know that they have to steal a car and deliver it to someone else. They steal the most anonymous models of cars, of course. They hand it over to someone else. Perhaps someone who has a workshop, or simply someone who parks it in front of their house, then secretly puts on a fake license plate. The person who has the car in their possession moves it to another street, after a few days to avoid drawing attention. The important thing is that on that day, every car is in the right place, and the driver can take it over. Among the stolen cars in the previous weeks is also the famous Red R4, in which Moro's body will later be found a long time after. The most important car of all is a white 128 that must remain parked on Fani Street. And when Moro's 2 cars enter Fani Street, the white 128 must leave the parking lot and merge into the street in front of them. And then, upon reaching the stop sign, it must come to a halt. This car is driven by Mario Moretti, and the attention to detail often emerges. This obsessive attention to detail is what allows you to survive, or at least increases your chances of success. In this stolen car, you understand that Moro's car is suddenly approaching and they see a car parked there that positions itself in front of them. This car will have a diplomatic license plate that was also stolen a few months earlier, because for the police officer driving, the diplomatic license plate will automatically provide security and prevent any suspicion. They will also need 3 more cars to get away. They have arranged for a 132 to load Moro, and 2 other 128s, 1 blue and 1 white, so that the entire fire group can move away. So we arrive at March 16th, 1978. The night before, 2 comrades from the north arrived, and they all met because it is necessary to actually recognize each other. Then they went to sleep. Moretti, of course, like everyone who later recounts these things, says we didn't really sleep. There was too much tension. I was there reviewing all the details. Mario Moretti says that loneliness begins the night before. That morning of March 16th, it is still Moretti who has the most delicate task. Half an hour before 9, he drives past Moro's house to see if the escort cars are there, like every other day. They are there. Then, Mario Moretti goes around to all the other 10 comrades, each heading to their designated place, and informs all 10 that the operation is on. Anxiety is something we all have inside. They said it later, but I think it's credible. Moretti recounted that when someone wanted to join the Red Brigades, he would tell them, "Look, you know what you're doing. The statistics are what they are. In 6 months, if you're lucky, you'll be in jail. If you're not, you'll be dead." The repentants? Only the repentants have told this, I must say, have recounted that the tension was such that there was someone who felt unwell just before, someone who felt unwell just after. There was one who just before had to go to the bar to get a cognac. There was one who almost fainted right after, had to go to the bar to get a coffee. The Italian remedy for all problems, of course. Who knows? Only the repentants tell this, and sometimes they have a bit of a grudge, but it is clear that the tension was palpable. The attack itself lasts just a few seconds, but everything must fit together perfectly. Moretti is parked on Funny Street in the white 128. There must be someone signaling him to warn when Moro's cars are turning. The lookout is a woman. Her name is Rita Algranati. She is standing at the intersection with Forte Trionfale Street, from which the 2 blue cars are supposed to arrive, and she has a bouquet of flowers in her hand. The Brigadists studied and realized that a girl standing still, doing nothing, can be noticed. A girl standing still with a bouquet of flowers. Everyone sees her, but no one pays attention. It's normal. That's why Rita is holding a bouquet of flowers. Moro travels in 2 cars. He is in a blue 130 with the driver and the commander of the escort, Marshal Leonardo. The other 3 police officers are behind in a small Alfa Romeo. When they arrive, the girl signals, then gets on her Vespa and leaves. She is finished. She has no idea what will happen, and she has no idea where they will take Moro, just like no one else does. The white 128, driven by Mario Moretti, enters Funny Street right in front of Moro's car, and then slams to a stop. And here I pause for a moment, on another one of those little stupid mysteries that make no sense, have no meaning, and yet remind us every time how we are working on testimonies. And testimonies can sometimes be contradictory in a way that drives the historian crazy when trying to tell the truth. That's why they say, "What do you care about this? Just tell the truth, damn it." Then, according to many, another detail emerged during the trial. The white 128 that pulls up and then brakes at the stop to block Moro's car behind it had its brake lights intentionally deactivated, so that when the driver of Moro's car brakes, he doesn't notice immediately and crashes into it. This thing was confirmed in the trial. Moretti said, "Are you stupid? Why did we have to cover it up? Actually, we didn't want to be rear-ended, sorry. We didn't need anything at all. The rear-ending only created problems. We absolutely did not do anything like that." Moretti says, "Look, I actually know perfectly well that there was no collision at that moment. I stopped at the stop sign. And I remember perfectly that I saw Moro's driver in the rearview mirror, who stopped behind me. And then, since I wasn't moving, signaled with his hand for me to go." Moretti says, "At that moment the comrades opened fire. But for some reason, the judges in the trial were very concerned about this matter of the collision, so they went to investigate. Particular and surreal, the 130 that Moro was traveling in, is now displayed in a museum. It is at the Civil Motorization Museum in Rome. You go to see it and you can see the signs of a collision. Therefore, at the trial, they decided that this story was true. Moretti said, "Not a chance, they did push me, but later, when Moro's driver was killed, and he took his feet off the pedals, the car lurched forward." Again, as you understand, I don't believe that someone's fate can depend on this particular detail. It's unclear why even these things cannot be clarified. Then the rest is quite well known, all things considered. There are 4 of them, all obviously on the same side of the sidewalk. The 4 aviators, right there too. 1,000 conspiracy theories suggest that based on the trajectories, there should have been another person who got out of Moretti's white 128 and shot from the other side. All the brigadists unanimously said, "Are you crazy? Do you know what it means to shoot from both sides of the same street? It's obvious that those who were shooting were all on the same side." In the first car, the driver and Marshal Leonardo are sitting in the front, while Moro is in the back. It is quite easy not to hit him, even for the brigadists, who are not at all sharpshooters. This is something that is worth emphasizing again, because many of us will remember the formulas that circulated at the time, the geometric power of the Red Brigades fire group. All the testimonies have told us the opposite. "We hardly ever shot," says Moretti. "I must have fired a gun twice in my life. How do you think one trains to use a submachine gun? Where do you find a place where you can practice using a submachine gun?" Therefore, says Moretti, "we were beginners, amateurs, and our submachine guns were terrible. Out of 4, 2 jammed during the operation. It's just that the escort is poorly armed as well. Marshal Leonardo has his gun in a bag under the seat. The driver has his gun in a bag in the dashboard. The only submachine gun available is in the trunk of the Alfetta. The Red Brigades find it in those few seconds after dragging Moro into the car, as they rummage through the 2 cars in search of Moro's bags." Another aspect that, as you know, will lead to endless discussions. Did all of Moro's bags come to light or not? Who took them? Who hid them? The fact is that the brigadists search for them, but they don't find all of them. However, they do find this submachine gun in the trunk and obviously take it. The turncoat Patrizio Pecci will later say that the submachine gun we took from Moro's escort was rusty, almost unusable. After all, Moro will also say it, that during his captivity, as you know, he writes many letters. On April 4th, from Moro's captivity, he writes to Zaccagnini, "If the escort had not been, for administrative reasons, completely inadequate to the needs of the situation, I might not be here." 2 machine guns jam on 4 of the brigadists, and one of the police officers from the second car manages to get out, draw his pistol, and starts shooting. His name is Raffaele Iozzino. Obviously everyone targets him. The 2 brigadists have a submachine gun, while the others have pistols. Raffaele Iozzino is riddled with 17 bullets. According to the expert reports, a total of 91 shots were fired, of which 45 hit the 5 men in the escort. One of the agents is still alive. In fact, he will die in the hospital, but we can say that the escort has been exterminated. At that point, Mario Moretti pulls Moro out of the back seat. They asked if Moro reacted. "But no," says Moretti. "He didn't say a word. We were in shock too, let alone him." They load him into the 132, which has just arrived from Chiabrera Street, and leave with that and the other cars. 4 cars in total. Oh, before leaving the corner of Stresa Street and Fani Street, there is a detail that I did not know and found incredible, even if it is irrelevant. Among all the people living there who, upon hearing gunfire, lean out of their windows, is the Honorable Pino Rauti, a neo-fascist, extremist, and very famous at the time, who lives there on Stresa Street. That morning, he looks out and sees the cars leaving and the bodies on the ground. It doesn't mean anything, but it's one of those things, one of those details that leaves you stunned. The cars are all running. There are 3, but not even a 4th. They have planned for a cover car to lead the column. They speed away at maximum velocity, 4 cars one behind the other, they were told. "But shouldn't you keep a low profile?" And Moretti replied, "Come on!" At that moment, it wasn't important to go unnoticed. The gunfire can be heard a kilometer away. The essential thing was to get out of there, quickly. They move away at maximum speed, stopping a little further on at Piazza Madonna del Cenacolo, and check to make sure everyone is there. You also check the time, rightly so, but we are almost at the deadline. At that point, they split up. The 2 from the north go to Termini Station, and take the train to return home. Almost everyone else rushes home, glued to the television and the radio to hear what will be said. The cars are all abandoned and will be found in the following days. There, at Piazza Madonna del Cenacolo, Moro is transferred to a van that has been prepared in advance. Inside the van, there is a wooden crate they have built, an uncomfortable space for a man to fit inside. Moretti recounts that when they pulled Moro out of the truck to take him to the secret accommodation, they apologized to him because the truck was uncomfortable. These are the oddities of human nature. Anyway, the van departs, driven by Mario Moretti, and in front there is another car with two companions providing escort. Among all of them, only Moretti and Gallinari know where they are going, to Montalcini Street, but not right away. There is a whole route to follow. They approach the area via a route previously calculated through suburban backroads, almost rural. At a certain point, they even take a private road that is not marked on the maps and that they had previously identified while scouting. This private road is closed off by a chain. They cut the chain with a pair of bolt cutters and slip through. The forecast of the detail. They have a pair of wire cutters in every vehicle, because you never know what might happen, but anyone who arrives there must be able to pass. And the calculation proves to be correct. Many witnesses saw the four cars speeding away. From the moment they took this side road, no one has seen them again. Along the way, they even parked another stolen car with a driver who is there, just in case something is needed. However, there is no need for anything. They arrive at their destination, which is the underground parking lot of the Standa at Colli Portuensi. A large warehouse with a big underground parking lot is full of people loading and unloading goods, and no one notices a container being unloaded from a van and loaded onto a car. It is Laura Brighetti's car, the tenant, on Chiabrera Street. It is the only car that hasn't been stolen. It really is her car. She lives there, the neighbors know her, and no one suspects that car. They go straight to the garage on Montalcini Street. It is not yet 10 o'clock. An hour later, and Moro is already in the secret room. And here our story is almost over, because obviously another one begins that we will not tell tonight, and that is still not easy to recount. The story I have told you is a story. It is a mechanism of events, you see. It can be reconstructed. The story of Moro's captivity, the secret negotiations, the line of firmness, and Moro's letters. It is a vast Italian story that still needs to be studied. It is the story of searches that lead nowhere, of mysteries that remain unsolved. We do not tell it. I will share a few details, just to give you an idea of the atmosphere. Like the telex, which that morning, as soon as informed of Moro's kidnapping, the head of Lusigos, the Central Office for General Investigations and Special Operations, which is essentially the Italian FBI, that morning the head of Lusigos, Antonio Fariello, sends a coded message to all prefectures and police headquarters. Implement. Plan. 0 immediately. In all the prefectures and police headquarters in Italy, people are scratching their heads. What is plan? 0. They go to check the drawers. They go to look in the safe. No one knows what plan 0 is. The only police headquarters that knows what it is the one in Sassari, where until recently Dr. Fariello was the chief, and he is now the head of Luchigos. In Sassari, he had found in a safe a plan for the mobilization of law enforcement in Sassari, in case of a kidnapping, which, as you know, happened often in Sardinia at the time. After that, Dr. Fariello was convinced that Plan 0 existed. In all the police headquarters in Italy, he sends this order. However, there are immediate reactions from the state that are less comical, or rather, they can be seen in two ways. Let me give you an example. That same afternoon, Minister Cossiga, the Interior Minister, informs the press about the names and photographs of 20 suspects. And this matter can indeed be told in two opposite ways. If we want to continue with the story of Plan 0, then I will tell you that out of 20 names, 2 are of people who are already in prison. The other two, along with their photographs, are both of Prospero Gallinari, one without a mustache with his real name, and one with a mustache using a false name. Another is an informant for the Carabinieri, but the minister did not know this. However, if we look at history from another perspective, among those 20 names, there are 5 of the true perpetrators of the kidnapping of Aldo Moro. There is Moretti, there is Gallinari, and there is the rest of the executive, Bonisoli, Azzolini, Micheletto. In short, they were not starting from scratch. The question remains as to why nothing was found, despite the enormous and, as one historian called it, the senseless deployment of forces during those weeks, with an average of 1,300 checkpoints every day in Italy and 700 home searches each day. In the end, 6 million people in Italy will be searched. And obviously the fact that we found nothing, there also fuels conspiracy theories. But then I wanted to finish. No, here I was uncertain between 2 endings, but I'll give you both. One thing that seemed interesting to me, and both are related to the only success that law enforcement had during that period, is the discovery of the so-called hideout on Gradoli Street, which was actually a base of the Red Brigades in Rome, where Moretti and Barbara Balzerani were sleeping, and it was discovered during that time. One thing that I found fascinating is the list, the inventory, of what was found in the hideout on Gradoli Street. A drawer in the cabinet contains a submachine gun, a hunting rifle, a .25 caliber pistol, an FFCK pistol, another FCK pistol, a Beretta pistol, a pistol grip, a magazine, and so on. It's just a drawer from the apartment. Then, of course, in the refrigerator, there are portions of salami, mortadella, provolone. On the shelf, a jar of jam, butter, a box of dice, a star. Briefcases, a bulletproof vest, and a plastic bag with a women's toiletry kit. The list of all senators of the 7th legislature, yellow books, science fiction books, Charlie Brown comics, fake identity documents, fake stamps from various offices, license plates of stolen cars, police uniforms and badges, packs of cigarettes, Goluas, Caporal, MS, smoking, heavily. Copies of newspapers, the Corriere della Sera, open to the page, recounting Moser's victory in some race. I can no longer remember. Star tomatoes, Derica peas, cereal beans. Here, this is something that may not be very significant for the historian, not at all, but it gives an idea of the Italian atmosphere that could be felt even in the most dangerous hideout of the Red Brigades, where indeed, buitoni pasta, of course, and barilla, both types, short pasta, no spaghetti. The other thing connected to the hideout on Gradoli Street that we really end with this time is the story that, I don't know where it leads us, but it's too beautiful not to tell, about the seance. And on April 2nd, Sunday, Moro is in the hands of the Red Brigades. The frantic searches continue, and a group of friends with their families gather to spend the Sunday at a country house outside Bologna. Since it is raining, they decide to hold a seance and ask the spirits where Moro is hidden. They are not just any friends, they are all professors from the University of Bologna. One of them is named Romano Prodi. They hold the seance, and since they are all leftist Catholics, they invoke the spirits of Don Sturzo and Giorgio Lapira. They ask him where Moro is, and the planchette moves and spells out a word, Gradoli. What is Gradoli? What is Gradoli? They go to check. Gradoli is a small town in the province of Viterbo. They place a map on the table. The planchette, guided by the spirit, moves and ends up on the province of Viterbo. Now, this is already something, if we want, quite bizarre, but the most bizarre thing is how we know all this. Because the day after, Professor Prodi, back in Bologna, goes to the Digos and recounts this seance from which the name Gradoli emerged. The day after, Professor Prodi goes to Rome and discusses this matter with the head of the press office of the Christian Democracy. The head of the press office of Christian Democracy goes to the ministry and discusses it with a collaborator of Cossiga, the Minister of the Interior. Cossiga's collaborator speaks about the séance to the police chief, Dr. Perlato, and the following day, Dr. Perlato orders a search in the town of Gradoli. Based on the séance, the news, of course, leads to nothing. But the information about the séance circulates so much among close associates that even Eleonora Moro, Moro's wife, learns about it. She will recount that she told a police officer. But could it perhaps be the name of a street instead? The police officer responded to Mrs. Moro that there is no Gradoli Street in Rome. Then everyone will remember it 2 weeks later, when neighbors call the firefighters because there is a water leak in a building on the outskirts. The firefighters break down the door. There is indeed a water leak, and it is the apartment on Via Gradoni that I just described to you a moment ago, the apartment of Moretti and Balzerani. Those who say that coincidences do not exist say University of Bologna. There, the workers' autonomy was very strong. Rumors circulated, and someone among the professors must have heard this name, Gradoli. They did not want to compromise themselves, and thought of the séance to convey the information without revealing who it came from. I don't know if it's worse to say the patch of the hole, as they say. This is why, in any case, the idea that the police go to conduct searches because they were told that a séance revealed a name tells us what the situation was like at that moment in Italy, and perhaps says something about our country, where even tragedy is always a hair's breadth from turning into farce. Thank you.